In this video, we're going to show you how to do block 9 for the sampler quilt.
In this video, we're going to discuss the sampler blocks. Laying here in front of the camera is block 1 from the sampler quilt, and today we're going to stitch block 9. So our video will be on block 9. The sampler blocks all have one corner with solid fabric in it, no other embroidery. That's the only difference between those and the blocks from the Premier quilt. So for block 9, you will need your battleizer hooped up and ready to go, and I've already stitched step 1. You will need your optional batting if you choose to go that way, the wool batting. You will need a square of fabric 1, a rectangle of fabric 2, a larger square of fabric 3, a square of fabric 4, and 2 rectangles of fabric 5. You will also need your thread 1 with a bobbin, thread 2 with a bobbin, 3 with a bobbin, 4 with a bobbin, 5 with a bobbin, and your pop of color thread with a bobbin, as well as your vanish light. Let's get started. For step 1, I put a contrasting thread in the needle, and we're going to stitch the placement stitch onto the battleizer. Optional batting time. So if you opt to do the batting underneath your stitching on your blocks, this is what we recommend you do. This is a little square of wool batting, and what we recommend you do is place it on your ironing board, put a press cloth over it, and then with your iron, just press the 4 edges. You can see through the press cloth. So I'm just pressing the 4 edges. It compresses those and keeps your foot from getting caught on the batting when you stitch it down. So you can hopefully see the impression here. So when I peel this off, we put a press cloth on because it will stick to your iron otherwise. So we have nice compressed edges along the edges of your batting. So do that first before you continue on. So as you can see, I have my batting laying on top of my battleizer inside my placement line. Hopefully you can see the compressed edges. I have wash away thread in the needle, and I'm going to go ahead and start, and the machine is going to baste, kind of do a zigzag baste around the edges to hold down the batting. And the reason we use wash away is so it actually will go away after it's stitched, so it doesn't add a layer of bulk, doesn't add any color, you won't see anything. So as you can see, we have, this is our placement stitch, stitched on the battleizer. The wool is inside of that. It's zigzagged down with the water-soluble thread, so there will be absolutely no bulk in the seam that you need to trim out later. So we're ready to go on to step number 3. Step 3 is next. We will place a square of fabric 3 directly over the wool batting, and you can feel that you've got it centered. Continuing with water-soluble thread, we will stitch actually a tack down stitch. So I've gone ahead and stitched step 3 and also trimmed away the excess fabric, leaving about maybe 1/8 of an inch here in this area and enough for the seam allowances in the corner. For step 4, we will place fabric 2 in the lower corner, again keeping 1/2 inch around the outside edge, and still continuing with water-soluble thread, and the machine will tack down this piece of fabric. So from step 4, I've stitched down fabric 2 and gone ahead and trimmed it away, leaving about 1/8 of an inch in this area here. For step 5, we will continue with water-soluble thread, and the machine will stitch placement stitches for appliques. So here we have the placement stitches from step 5. For step 6, we'll take fabric 4 and place it in this upper corner to cover these 2 placement stitches. So just keep about 1/2 inch seam allowance around the outside edge. Continue with water-soluble thread and stitch the tack down up for these 2 flowers. Step 6 is all stitched. Time to trim away for these appliques. Need to trim very close on the inside of the block around this whole flower here and here, leaving in the seam allowance in this area here. So we'll trim it like this and really tight right here, but go ahead and leave in the seam allowance. So we'll get that trimmed and move on to the next step. So I finished trimming my appliques from step 6. For step 7, we will place fabric 1 directly over the placement stitch, centering the fabric and keeping water soluble in the needle, and stitch the tack down. Step 7 has completed stitching, so we're going to trim the outside edge of the flower that's inside the block really close for applique. This area right here will be underneath some more fabric, so we can leave about a scant 1/4 inch and just trim the rest of it really close. So I have my applique all trimmed and ready to go. For step 8, we will place thread A in the needle only, and it'll do a satin stitch around the flower and also a satin stitch right in this area right here on these 2 flowers. Time for step 9, we will place thread F in the needle only, and we'll stitch some decorative accents on this flower and around the outsides of these flowers. Step 10, we need thread D in the needle only, and it'll stitch the satin stitches around the flowers. Step 11, we'll place thread C in the needle only, and it'll stitch a decorative stitch around this area. For step 12, we'll place water-soluble thread back at the needle, and it'll stitch placement stitches for more appliques. For step 13, we'll take your wider triangle of fabric 5 and place it over the placement stitches, making sure it covers it. We will keep water-soluble thread in the needle, and the machine will stitch a tack down. So I've tacked down my fabric 5 from step 13, and now I'm going to go ahead and trim it really close for applique all the way around, and then we'll continue with the next step. So I'm all trimmed from the last step, and notice I've kept fabric here in the seam allowance. We don't trim that really close because we don't want that raw edge to show. And for step 14, we will place thread E in the needle only, and it'll stitch the satin stitches around the applique. For step 15, we'll take our second and narrower strip of fabric 5 and place it over the open area. Change to water-soluble thread in the needle, and the machine will stitch a tack down. Continuing with step 15, we've gone ahead and stitched our tack down, and now it's time to trim the entire applique around all the edges very close. So we'll go ahead and do that and come back to do our next step. Step 16, it's time to place the back, so we'll turn the hoop over, center the back fabric over the stitching, and carefully turn it back over, and continuing with water-soluble thread, the machine will stitch the back on. Step 17, after the back has been placed on, we're going to place thread E in the needle and the bobbin, and it's also a good time to turn off your automatic thread cutter because the back's on, and you'll have a much nicer looking back if your machine doesn't cut the thread itself. Step 18, you'll place thread A in the needle and the bobbin and stitch some more decorative stitches. For step 19, we'll place thread D in the needle and the bobbin and stitch more decorative stitches. For step 20, we will place thread F in the needle and the bobbin to do some decorative stitches on top of this flower. For step 21, we'll place thread B in the needle and the bobbin, and we'll do some of Sharon Schomburg's beautiful quilting in the lower left corner. So we come to our last quilting step for this block, step 22. We'll place thread C in the needle and the bobbin and complete the quilting in the pink area. Block 9 is ready to go ahead and trim. So what you'll do is you'll take your trimmer by George, pull your front of your block up and out of the way, put the metal edge of the trimmer down flat, and rotary cut off the battleizer and the backing. The metal edge protects the block from being cut. I'm going to put a border on this particular quilt, so I will trim all 4 edges using the Trimmer by George. If you're not going to use a border, you can follow the instructions. It will tell you how to trim each block. This block is in a corner, so there'll be binding on a couple of the edges, so you'll need to refer to your instructions for trimming. So we'll do all the battleizer and the backing first, using the metal edge of the trimmer. And then you'll turn the trimmer over, and there's a 1/4 inch line. We line that up with the basting line, and we trim off any excess fabric around the edge of the blocks. So each sampler block, you will make 4 of them and stitch the 4 of them together. So this happens to be a 9-inch sampler block of block 9. And also month 1, here's our block 1, 4 of them stitched together. And this, I believe, is a 6-inch sample. So get started finishing the rest of your sampler blocks.